I mean, is it even possible for me to win at this point? I don't, like, is it even worth me trying to do? Whatever, lad.
Pay up, lad. Come on.
I mean, come on,
What
mate.
have you got there? Read the
tenner,
street.
like, you could at least trade me or something.
No,
that's what I have to
obviously
pay
you
it.
can't trade. Like, look, that would be shit. A hotel.
Yeah, but you have, like, how would I even have won that? Like, you're on every single square in the area. Like, the only way I could win is if I am in jail.
I'm
like,
not going to take some fucking slum land off you, lad.
Would you at least, like, I mean, I've got...
Look, I'm obviously not going to swap with you. This is like not even worth it. I've barely got any properties myself, mate, let alone that piece of shit. Like, I'm not...
Well, look, you fucking got to the middle first, and then you managed to get everyone's rent off them. It's just not even fair. I've just been landing all the bad cards.
Why you mad? You know, we all had the same opportunity. You could have literally just... You could have bought the properties yourself. That's not my fault that you were.
How is that my fault?
Look, anyway, he's been stealing from the bank the entire time, so I don't know why you're looking at me. I'm playing fairly.
Yeah, why the fuck? Yeah, to be fair, how the fuck have you ended up with that then?
Why are you winding him up? He's a fucking ape. Like, why?
You know what I mean? At least I'm playing fairly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, give me that then.
Like, lad, I obviously can't trade you that. I mean, the game is to get people out. You unfortunately have lost. That's not my fault, innit?
Yo, it's only fair.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you'd have landed in jail, maybe you maybe your whole thing. It's a game of statistics, pal. You know, if I get the properties, yeah, it's unlucky in that area, but if I land in that area of the board, I might get shafted too. You have to get some money off me. Maybe I swap a property or two. You have to play the game.
Mate, right, you're holding up the game now. You're holding up the game, so just give him the property and then go. Like,
Fucking stupid game, anyway.
Fucking game, anyway.
Monopoly's a shit game, innit? I say this as someone who exclusively plays League of Legends and chess, but Monopoly is a self-admittedly shit game. You see, Monopoly is based on a 19th century piece of political propaganda known as the Landlord's Game. Now, this is not a piece of political propaganda for your classics, your granddad's political ideologies, fascism, communism, very boring. This is for a refined gentleman's political ideology known as Georgism, based on the ideas of the economist Henry George, the OG, original George of the Georgists. Now, you see, the primary thing that Henzo was concerned with is how land functions differently to other goods and assets in the economy. You see, because markets work due to their ability to create more things and to function in mutual benefit. One of the primary ways that they do this is through something known as the velocity of money. To do this, I'm going to do an economics classic. We'll do some tangential story based on, like, child's drawings of jobs. But I think it's whimsical. I think it's fun. Anyway, let's say you have a butcher who wants a haircut and a barber who wants a steak. First, what happens is the barber goes along and says, "Oh, here you are. Here's 20 quid for your steak, Mr. Butcher." And then the butcher goes back to the barber and says, "Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a tenner for my haircut." So in this exchange, you could say £30 worth of value has been created. Now, obviously, in a naive system of bartering, this would still work. Something, state of nature, etc. However, this situation gets way more useful and obvious when you play this across billions of transactions across the entire economy. So to extend, what do we do with that other 10 quid that's left over for the butcher? Well, let's say 2 quid goes to pay for some guy who works there, helps him slice the meats or whatever. Another 2 quid goes to the farmer to pay for the cow. And like another quid goes to pay for the tools that he uses to do his butchering. And in each of these situations, each of those individuals can spend the money that the butcher has given them on their own operations. So the farmer can use the 2 quid to expend his farming operation. The guy who works there really likes the butcher's new haircut. So he also decides to go to the barber. And now the barber also has 20 quid back that he originally spent on his steak. It's a beautiful system. You can see why Maggie Thatcher strummed herself up over it. But what about that remaining 5 quid? Well, that, my friend, goes to rent. You see, the reason that everyone gets wealthier in the velocity of money example is that more things are being created to meet the demand. So when you give that 2 quid to the farmer, he's going to use that 2 quid, usually, to create more cow. And likewise, the guy who works there is going to use it to pay other people in the economy for food and haircuts and whatnot. But importantly, why is it bad to give money to the landlord? Well, because he's not God or Dutch, he can't create more land. They usually aren't property developers. What they're going to do instead, they're going to use that money to buy more and more land, thus increasing the demand for land. And because there's no supply access on this graph, price for land inevitably increases. By paying the landlord, no extra productivity is being created. You see this in the case of consumer electronics, where in, let's say, the 1970s, a flat screen telly was an extremely luxury good, and now even the poorest families in the UK can afford a flat screen telly. And this is because, as people realise that flat screen tellies are sick, the demand increased for them, which means these companies create more of them, which drives the price down, supply and demand, etc., meaning that at some point it will reach an equilibrium, as we'll talk about in the following section. To use the simplest classic example for this, let's say there's a bridge, much like this one, hence the location. The cows are coming across the bridge for the butcher, and the steaks are leaving to other towns to sell across county lines, etc. And at some point, let's say Wankstone McDuck comes along and decides, oh, there's a profit-making opportunity here. If I simply buy the bridge and then charge people £5 to cross it, I'll be able to make loads of money, because everything that comes into the town, I'll be able to get a sort of tax on. If you notice in this example, now when the farmer brings his cows in, he's having to pay £5 on every cow or whatnot. No extra productivity has been created. He was doing this before. All that has now happened is an economic rent has been applied to the entire situation. Okay, nice, yeah, like my property rights and all that. But what happens now is that when the farmer brings his cows in, he's going to have to decide whether to pass that £5 charge onto the butcher or just eat it into his cost. So if he eats it into his cost, and now he's only getting £15 for every cow, that means he's going to be limited in how much he can expand his operation, thus in the long run limiting the supply of cows. And if he does pass on the charge, let's say he does pass on the charge, £25, the entire thing goes down to the butcher now has to pass that charge on to his customers as well. So now he's having to charge £25. I know the maths isn't spot on here. It's illustrative, it's a model, I'm illustrating a point. Now he passes the £25 on to the customer, so now there's going to be some percentage of people which would have bought a steak at £20 but not at 25, and rather than that extra charge going to the butcher to expand his operation so he can employ more people, maybe he does a better marketing campaign to get more people buying the steaks, which means he can increase supply, meaning that the farmer gets more custom. Instead, that £5 just gets eaten by Wankstone McDuck. And for basically no benefit, to pay for something that he didn't create and is actually adding no extra value towards doing, and is in fact making the entire system worse off by doing so. You see, before the landlord dominates your entire economy, this £5 charge might not be the biggest issue. You go, well, I've got this bullshit charge over here, so I'll just increase my selling to the next town over. Meaning, yeah, this town gets left behind because of Mr. Wankstone, but this town will profit more. But unfortunately, because rent seeking is so profitable, Mr. Wankstone can take the profits he got from rent seeking on this town's bridge to buy the next town over's bridge, so he can do the trick over and over again. And it's even worse when you consider the fact that in the actual world, most people also have a house that they have to pay for, whether it be through renting off a landlord or paying a mortgage to a bank to pay off some house that already existed way before the bankers were born, meaning that the discretionary income that they even have to spend on steaks or haircuts in the first place is already reduced. And all that will happen is, again and again, Mr. Wankstone will buy more and more bridges, and soon you can see why you're paying 50% of your paycheck to a landlord every month. Turns out being a parasite is profitable work. You see, these free market types that are now dominant across our cultural landscape, while they're correctly dunking on the Marxists for treating markets as a zero-sum game, they're absolutely not correct to do so when it comes to finite assets, such as land and gold, and in a more pure sense, simply buying up things that already exist and then charging rents to be able to use them in the future. You're not creating productivity there. This isn't some beautiful capitalist enterprise. You're simply exploiting a bug in the system. You're exploiting the fact that land is a finite resource and exploiting the state to basically make profit off the entire society. Other industries where the demand is driving supply, thus making everyone richer, all that the demand is doing in the case of finite assets is simply driving the price for the same thing higher and higher and higher over time. Okay, right, but I hear you cry. Well, my mate's a landlord, and he worked really hard to get his house, and actually, he did up the house and put a new boiler in or whatever. That's not the thing that's being criticised here. You are doing productive work by putting in a new boiler and giving it a lick of paint, even if it is all cream and grey carpet. You were providing value by working as an electrician or whatever to build up the capital to buy that house in the first place, but you're completely ignoring the fact that the principal thing that is driving house values is not how nice the paint is, it's simply the appreciation of land. And I know that you know this, to all the private landlords that might watch this video, because I see your YouTube channels. I see the emphasis on land, I see the emphasis on location, and I know you know this, so stop lying, right? The extractive element of this entire situation is the fact that the majority of the rent you're able to charge on that property now is driven by the price of land, not driven by how nice it is. What I'm saying is the fact that your house is worth £2 million is not because of how nice the boiler is or whatever. It's because you bought a house in Croydon in 1970 for 50p and a hand job, and then London happened around you. basically. Again, right, I need to emphasise, we do need property development, right? Taking derelict land such as this and then building houses or warehouses or whatever it might be on the land, that is productive work and we need to encourage that. But we don't need to encourage people simply buying up things that already exist and then charging economic rent on it, buying a piece of land, getting planning permission on it, waiting 5 years and then selling it again, right? It's still just a field, mate. You've not done anything there. We basically need systems that encourage the prior and discourage the latter. I'll tell you what I do hate though. Misogyny. Do you know what I do hate though? These sort of free market types that defend this situation as outlined because you should know better. So let's do some super heckin' economics 101 type business and then you'll understand why you stop defending it because it's cringe. I've got a message. What the fuck is that? Why is it that free market simps hate taxes? Well, it's because taxes are inefficient and also maybe they're a bit mildly psychopathic, but they do have a valid point. Okay, so to go back to the farmer butcher thing from before, in the purest form, if the butcher is selling steaks, he's going to want to sell the steaks for as much as he reasonably can get for them, and by extension, sell as many steaks as he is able to. Because in this naive system of perfectly rational actors, it is more profitable to do so. So let's say that that butcher who was selling his steaks at 20 quid suddenly decides, I know, I like money. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge 30 quid per steak. Oh no, he says, I've now got a bunch of people who won't buy my steaks. So let's say now the butcher can only sell 80 of the original 100, so he's just got 20 steaks lying about. How am I going to sell these steaks? So the butcher chooses the obvious option, which is he reduces his price down, albeit this time 25 quid, so still 5 more than he originally was selling them for, and hooray, right, for the butcher, he managed to sell the extra 20 steaks. You could say now, providing that all those other 80 people will also buy at 25 quid, there has been a new equilibrium price set. You can now sell 100 steaks for 25 quid, not 20 quid a pop. Very nice, at least for the butcher, maybe not so much for the poor sods buying the steaks. And then the butcher goes, oh actually, I would like to make more steaks and I would like to expand that operation with the extra 5 quid I got off all those purchases. The butcher drops his prices even further, back down to the original price, some kind of sale period, let's say, you know, buy them quick and that. And now a bunch of people want to buy his steaks again. So now he could sell 120 steaks at the new price of 20 quid. And now 120 steaks can be created for the same price as they were at 100. Everyone wins. Yay, capitalism, etc. Right. Okay, now we're going to apply a tax. Let's say VAT. So we have VAT in the UK. It's 20% on every consumer purchase, you know, asterisk, you know, essential goods. If you make up for it in the books, there's various stuff you can do to avoid this. Now again, providing that the butcher decides to pass on this 20% tax on to the customer, we'll round it up and such, he's now going to have to sell his steaks for 25 quid again to account for the tax. Those extra 20 people don't want to pay 25 quid for the steak but would have paid 20. So now the butcher loses out on those sales, but not because he's going to get extra profit from the previous people, simply because he's now having to charge 25 quid a steak instead of the usual 20. So those 20 steaks now basically just don't get produced, right? And now each one of those 100 steaks is now more expensive than they would have paid previously. And overall, fewer steaks are now being made. Alternatively, the butcher decides to just eat this 20% into his cost, which now means, as mentioned in the previous section, it's 20% of reinvestment into the business or people that can get employed or upgrades in tools that don't get made. You know, maybe he even has to lower the quality or the size of the steaks he's selling, pumping them full of water now, or he's getting them from a factory farm to save on a bit of cost. It's not only just that, by the way. In this naive system where VAT is just being applied to everything, in the case of the farmer, the same situation happens to him. Either he's going to have to take that 20% hit in profit that he could use to reinvest in the farm, or he passes that cost on to the butcher, who's now having to pay 25 quid per steak, and then the butcher has the decision, again, of passing on that cost again. So he's now having to pay more for the cows to make the steaks, and he's getting less customers for the steak as well. Now, in this system, everyone loses, right? Except they don't, if those taxes are then spent on higher order goods, the classics roads, military, police, etc. Things that even by this free market capitalists or admission actually aid in the function of markets. They keep law and order so that businesses can thrive, secure oil deals with the Middle East, etc. Now this again, as you can probably tell where I'm going with this, is the exact same thing that is happening in the private landlord scenario. It is effectively an added charge that doesn't aid to going to create more of the thing that you're paying for or go to the adjacent goods that are used to create the thing. Now the astute among you might be thinking, well, you know, part of the production process of steak is the building that it's made in, so you have to pay for the building that it's made in. That could be seen as a productive good. And this is also true for most of the things that aren't directly related. You know, he has to pay for an email service provider, or even himself. If you were trying to be really crude about it, you could see the profit margin that the butcher himself is taking as an economic inefficiency. And again, the key difference in the scenario is that by paying for those things, it is creating more of them. It's creating demand that can be met by supply. You paying for that steak, in principle, doesn't get rid of it for someone else, because we can create more steak, we can breed more cows, the barber can employ another barber to get more haircuts, etc. But you paying a landlord for the building doesn't create more building, usually, unless he's a property developer. But again, we'll get into that. On the contrary, in the case of land, usually what it's doing, in fact, quite literally what it's doing in the case of land, is removing that single plot of land from any other human in existence using it, because land is always a natural monopoly, right? Every piece of land is unique in every location. If the thing you're paying for by its nature physically cannot create more of itself, you're not allowing this beautiful equilibrium price game to play out. What you're instead doing is just putting upward pressure on prices that can never be met by supply. Which means that down the line, the same goods and services, or in this case, land, the same land will be worth more, regardless of if anything's been done to it. As long as the population in an area goes up, or the demand to live in an area goes up, the price of the land will go up. And as I said, that extra surplus usually isn't going to develop housing or anything like that. It's going to him to buy up more land so that he can rent seek further, so that he can go for more land. He's effectively buying the opportunity to charge private taxes on each of his tenants over and over again. And unlike in the case of actual taxes, where they're going towards roads and such, he's simply doing it to expand his own business empire if you want to call it that. On the most basic level, to understand the argument here, if you're charging rent to that butcher for the butcher's shop, and you didn't build the butcher's shop, you simply just bought it off somebody else, you are unequivocally, demonstrably, a parasite on the economy. It is more inefficient than any VAT could ever be, for something, again, that if you weren't there would still exist, much like the bridge example in the first section. Well, no, they say, actually, it wouldn't exist. People need a level of liquid housing in the economy, Some people can't afford to buy a butcher's shop. Maybe the butcher couldn't afford to pay the full price of the butcher's shop up front. This is true, we do need some level of landlords in our society, unfortunately. However, this completely ignores the fact that you yourself are driving up the price of the butcher's shop by increasing the demand for it, by competing with the butcher to buy the butcher's shop first, right? Even if one other person is now competing to buy that butcher's shop, you've effectively doubled the demand for that single plot of land. Meaning that as rent seeking becomes more and more of an interesting opportunity in your society, it is actually justifying the need for itself more, because by everyone now competing for these plots of land and these properties, it's now driving up the price further, which means even fewer people who don't have the capital to begin with can buy stuff, meaning that they need to rent further, meaning that it drives the price up further, because then you have the income that can then pay for more plots of land, which drives up the price of land even more. I hope you're now starting to see how catastrophic the situation is. I risk repeating myself here, but to really drive this point home, imagine if the butcher had zero rent, right? Imagine, for whatever reason, we'll get into solutions towards the end, but if he had zero rent, that's effectively now £5 worth of cow or employee or tooling or whatever that can now then be added back into the economy to produce stuff. No one here other than the landlord benefits from the rent seeking, right? The farmer gets less sales because of the landlord, because the butcher doesn't have as much money to buy cows off him, and also has lower demand. The butcher again gets lower demand for his steaks and gets less profit. The hairdresser who could have bought the steaks for 15 quid in the original example now has to pay 20 for them instead for exactly the same thing. And not to mention here, in the real world, every single person here usually has a house that they're also paying off a mortgage on, at the very least, or oftentimes a flat that they're renting or a house that they're renting or whatever, meaning that already the amount of discretionary income they even have to buy steaks or haircuts or whatever is already being eaten up before they even get to be able to buy them. And again, to pay for something that they did not create, right? They simply just bought off someone else and then appreciation happened, so now they can charge stupid amounts to live there. Landlords truly are the parasite class, is the point I'm trying to drive home here. But the government are also parasites, right? We could have more things and cheaper things if VAT did not exist, basically, because there'd be higher demand, etc., as expressed. But we also want roads and the army, so how do we pay for that? How do we tax people? What is the best way to tax? How do we tax people without excessively reducing the demand for the things that we tax? We charge taxes on the value of land. Now, obviously, if you're reading the Wikipedia page on Georgism halfway through this video, this is really the flagship policy of the Georgists, but it's a good one, acknowledging the fact that by taxing a finite good, you're not reducing its quantity, because price doesn't increase its quantity at all. We charge taxes on the finite good of land. Rory Sutherland, who is probably my favourite proponent of this because he's a very sort of risful guy in the UK. You see him on a lot of podcasts, big jolly chubby guy. He has a great way of putting this, which is land effectively functions as a rent-seeking device because everyone needs it. It's a natural monopoly, so that supply can't easily be increased. So who do we allow to use this device? Unlike in the case of private landlords using the rent-seeking device, where gains will beget gains, meaning that more and more of your income will just go to this private landlord fella. If we allow the government to use the rent extraction device, that money then goes into the public coffers, right? The government isn't using the rent to then further extract rents unless you count, the monopoly of violence as some sort of racketeering, which I guess is why the anarchists are the way they are. And importantly, as I said, benefit the landlord themselves. Because in the case of private landlords, as they slowly murk your entire economy, they're actually ruining the society themselves too. They'll sit there and be like, oh, why is the high street dying? Because you, dickhead. Because you exist. Like, yeah, sure, business rates and the various stupid taxes we have in the UK, but the biggest expense of businesses by far most of the time is the property they're paying to hold their business in. Off to Dubai they go to do the trick over again. I'm looking at you, Samuel Leeds, you fucking cunt. But I like that pub, said the landlord. Yeah, well, unfortunately, mate, you priced them out of existence by taxing them so much. Putting the rent so high. You made the rent and price of houses so expensive that you effectively just ruined the productivity of the UK. So now no one actually has any money to spend on goods in the economy anymore. But importantly, and I need to make this point, to make the productivity gains that this policy would get you, you have to cut the taxes in other areas, right? And that means cutting taxes that are stupid, like your income taxes, corporation taxes, VAT, like I said. And as much as you can, replace taxes on things like that are effectively representations of productive things in your economy, such as like working for a company. You can't just slap a land value tax on top of everything else and expect it to be all golden. We need, as part of this, to simplify overall our tax system and reduce the number of variant taxes and make up the vast majority of your tax income through smarter taxes like a land value tax. Okay, well, I'm a landlord and I'll just pass the tax on to my tenant. Truly a landlord classic. They are the most sadistic, childless bastards in the world. But anyway, well, that tenant just received a 10% pay increase effectively because his tax got cut, his income tax got cut, and we no longer have to pay the council tax that probably you should actually be paying, given that it was valued on the cost of land in like 1880 or something. To my American audience, I don't know if you know this, council tax, which is effectively our form of land tax, there is some forms of land tax, but applied in specific circumstances. Land tax, which is effectively council tax, is paid by the tenant, not by the landlord himself. But even all that aside, you won't be able to profit as much as you're hoping you will, based on two reasons. One, and this is the important one, you're already charging pretty much the maximum amount that people are going to be able to pay anyway. The shock to the market this would give might increase the prices slightly higher because landlords didn't realise just how much they could exploit the people. But you're already charging nearly at that point anyway because people aren't just going to go homeless. It's like a high priority good. It's not like pizza where you could probably do without it and just eat bread instead. And secondarily, depending on how you do the calculation of the tax, if you then decide, oh, well, my property is now worth 10% more, which is what you're conceding by charging 10% more rent, it means that your tax bill's higher because you've just said, well, this property is now worth £1,000 a month instead of £800 a month or whatever. So now you get charged £1,000 instead of 800. I mean, obviously, again, depends how you do the calculations. True Georgists would say you should do it just on the unproduced value of land, but which again, importantly, is putting a slight downwards pressure on prices, because now the landlord at least has a single incentive to not charge the absolute maximum price that he can get away with charging. But importantly, even if you did manage to pass on the tax, you wouldn't see it anyway, because all that amount would then go to the government, because it makes no economic sense for you to have it, as I've outlined over and over again in this video, meaning that it ultimately reduces the amount of extra land that you're going to be able to buy in the future. Because let's say hypothetically you decided to just raise your price by 10% anyway, and the tenants went, oh right, we'll pay that, don't worry, we actually can afford that. In that system where we don't have a land value tax, you then just get an extra 10% to then go do the rent seeking all again, where you just go buy up more and more land with the extra 10% profit that you have. In this example, that 10% just goes to the government. So if you take the idea here of whatever you tax, you're disincentivized from profiting off. So we tax cigarettes and alcohol a lot, meaning that it will put some downwards pressure on demand for cigarettes and alcohol, right? In the same way, if we tax work a lot, like income taxes, for example, you're disincentivized from working and instead incentivized to rent seek, right? You're incentivized to put your money and effort and time into things that aren't that if you're able to, such as land, which is why every boomer has like 3 houses, right? There are some sort of moral fairness type arguments for why land value taxes are a good idea, but I stayed away from them thus far because I think the economic case, the sort of autism case for land value taxes is way stronger. But one of them could be you don't deserve the money that you get for the increase in your house price because you didn't do the effort to earn it. In the first example where you bought the house in Croydon and then London happened, you didn't create London. I mean, you did a little bit by working your job, but you didn't create all of that value. You just bought a thing and then everyone else did the work around you to make London what it is, and now you're profiting off their work effectively. I mean, in the worst case, if you're basically a hereditary landlord, you basically just make millions of pounds off other people's labour explicitly, because you weren't a bin man, you weren't a lawyer or whatever, the people that actually made London valuable, you've simply just profited their labour. And even worse, a lot of those people had to rent off you in the first place, so you're actually taking money off the people doing work and giving it to yourself who is doing no work for the economy. And in fact is actually making London a little bit worse off. Like, you're literally reducing the amount of demand for goods and services in London by existing. However, there are some problems with land value taxes. The big ones, which means this will never happen, thanks to the home counties boomers, is the fact that if you live in a paid off house in the centre of London, let's say, whereas now you're basically just living rent-free, etc., everything's rosy, with a land value tax slapped on you, you're now probably going to have to move out, because that house that's now worth 2 million, you're going to get charged some bill on that. You're probably going to have to pay the bill by selling the house, which is going to be upsetting because those people are now going to have to move out of their family home, etc. You know, again, a Rory Sutherlandism on this one. One sob story of a grandma that had to move out of their family home that they bought in like the 60s means that this will never happen. Whereas the opportunity cost of a young person literally can't move to London to contribute productively to the economy because all the houses are too expensive and filled with old people, that's not really a sob story, is it? It's just a slow rot that no one sees. That land then, ideally, can be used by people who are still producing stuff. And this is not like a slandering of the elderly, you know, to some certain point you stop working, you want the most productive people in your economically productive areas. You want coal miners around the coal mines. You want bankers around the banks, you know what I mean? This is sort of what you want. And now that old person can use that money that they've generated from selling their house. So not really that sad, is it really, when you've got like 2 million off your house that you bought for £4. But either way, you now get to move to a smaller village that you basically have to pay no tax on, and you can also profit from the fact that now VAT has been lowered and income tax has been lowered, so there's actually more business in those small towns that are now starting to flourish as well. Now your milk and your bread's all cheap as well because VAT was cut down a little bit. And you need to consider, when this is being said as well, we already do charge land value taxes. The land value tax is exclusively paid by renters and usually is being paid by young people or people who weren't lucky enough to be able to buy a house in the first place. The tax revenue is now going to a private landlord and not to the government. The second problem with land value taxes is things that require large amounts of land but aren't that profitable. So, for example, farming would be the classic example. Now, a true Georgist would be ideological about this and say, well, there's no exemptions anywhere, but I do think given the fact that farming is so unprofitable already, we would probably have to give a tax exemption for agricultural land. That isn't like a shitty tax exemption where, Lord Toffington the nonce can put a greenhouse in his estate and now his entire fox hunting estate is now tax-free. No, it would have to be like properly done. But we already tax exempt farmers anyway, so this is not a huge deal. You'll remember the thing that Starmer's government did that was a massive controversy, where they removed the inheritance tax exemption for farmers, so a bunch of farmers and various aristocrats went down to London and complained, not unjustly to be fair. But the farming issue aside, I do feel things like golf courses will become much rarer around London. So the example of this very nice golf course in the centre of London will probably have to be sold. Quite sad, I guess. Not that sad when you consider the fact they're probably going to make billions of quid on the fucking land, but, these issues aside, there are many other benefits to land value taxes in this regard. So that golf course example, while it's tragic for the people of London that they now lose their nice golf course that was around the corner from their house, those people who sold off the land to now move out of London means that when they create that new golf course a bit further out from London, it's going to increase the demand to those areas because now there's a nice golf course that's going to employ people and encourage people to move into the area, meaning the economic productivity of the country gets spread out more. Those people who wanted to play golf might have to make a bit of a further out trip, but by doing that trip, they go to a local shop, maybe buy a brew, whatever, right? Thus, improving economic activity in places like the north that are very economically deprived, because effectively you're getting a tax cut in the economically underdeprived areas where rental values and house prices and property prices and such are proportionally less. And you need to think about these businesses who are basically stuck in London currently because that's where all the labour is. Because this tax effectively works as an averaging tool, those businesses can now go, well, the tax is too high when I live in the middle of London, so I can avoid the tax by setting up in Sunderland or something. And now the people of Sunderland get a nice new Amazon headquarters or whatever it might be, and the people of London still have London, so they can cry about it in the comments, whatever, right? And look, we've lowered your income and corporation tax and such, because now the land value tax is making up for those lost tax receipts. It does something that HS2 could never have promised to do in this capacity, truly. This also means, to do a classic Georgist argument, that you might not end up having to do the tax exemption in those agricultural areas, given the fact that they're already going to be paying less tax because the land is further out from metropolitan areas where the property is usually more expensive. But it's probably likely we will have to do some exemptions, at least in the UK, because we don't have that much fucking land, to be honest. In addition to this, we should probably also protect areas of natural beauty a little bit, so you can't build here without special permission or whatever, Lake District, etc. However, unlike now, where a large amount of the country is inaccessible because they're part of private estates, a lot of that land will have to be sold off because of the land value taxes, and that land is now unproductive, just owned by aristocrats or whatever to do their fox hunting and whatnot. They could even end up selling that to the government even, potentially get more national parks out of this, if the pressure on those aristocrats to sell is high enough. I want to hone on some of these positives a bit more, because thus far I've been talking in a way of land value taxes being a nice way to do something bad, a more efficient way of doing something bad. Land taxes are a beautiful and organically efficient way of encouraging productivity in these underdeveloped areas. One other benefit in this regard of land value taxes is that it actually encourages people to do productive things with their land. So whereas now you're going to pay the same amount of tax, in fact probably less, if you just leave your land as it is and allow it to appreciate, in the case of land value taxes, you're going to get charged a massive tax bill if you leave that plot of land empty or you do something with it. So you're encouraged to either sell the land, thus putting downwards pressure on prices, making it open for property developers and people who are going to do something with the land, or you just have to keep paying the tax, meaning you're getting charged for the society to keep your land safe. Which brings me on to another moral argument that Georgians would like to make about this. You could also see a land value tax as a charge for us to protect your property rights. So you didn't create the land already existed, you're basically fencing it off and saying it's yours. The thing that means that people aren't going to squat on that land is the police and the military and all this sort of thing. So you should pay us for us to maintain that for you. And you have to pay that whether or not you're doing something with it. And that's another benefit in the moral domain, where the person who's actually doing something with the land is effectively getting a tax break because they're going to be paying less income tax, all this other stuff. And another reason why land value taxes are incredibly based, and I'll leave on this one really, is that they're almost impossible to avoid. There is none of this, well, Mayfair's actually in the Cayman Islands. If it's registered in your company's name or in your name, however we decide to do the tax system, you can't lie about it, We know it's there. Pay up, lad. You know what I mean? I could go on about this. Land value taxes are the most based tax. We should just do them, right? We should do them maturely and with respect for the complexity of the economy of the UK, but we should try to implement them and replace our dumb taxes with smart taxes. And while we're at it, we should probably simplify our stupid tax system that means that accountants are probably one of the most beneficial things to buy for a small business. Only made worse by stupid random taxes that are brought in out of spite, like your mansion taxes, that are effectively understanding this economic effect of sitting on land and allow it to appreciate, but not having the bravery to actually go full hog. No, we don't need mansion taxes or wealth taxes, policies that are effectively just to give the populace left something to wank over. We need land value taxes that actually generate enough revenue for us to do anything with and do exactly the same thing that those taxes were aiming at doing. The goal of taxes isn't just to punish people because they have more money, it's to actually generate income to pay for the things that we all need. Which again, even if you were looking at it morally in this kind of way, land taxes are more fair. They literally tax the rich more and the poor less. They do it by their nature. They're an organic tax. The said populist left would do well to support this as well, as would most people in the UK. The only person who probably wouldn't is Countenance the 14th, aforementioned, who owns half of Devon. It only seeks to cut your overall taxes and increase taxes on things that ought to be taxed.
Just a slight addendum here. On the matter of wealth taxes, as is becoming very popular at the moment, thanks to our boy Gary Stevenson, they do suffer from the same sort of inefficiency problems as income taxes, corporation taxes, VAT, many of the taxes talked about in this video, except in the case of wealth taxes, they go off net worth instead of income, for example, which is also quite silly given the fact that most of these billionaires aren't billionaires in just terms of assets in the sense of land like talking about in this video, but they own multi-billion pound valuated companies, Amazon, etc. Meaning that to pay these taxes they are going to be liquidating elements of the productive economy in many cases. The aforementioned Amazon sacking off workers or reducing their wages to pay the taxes. So in the end you are taxing work again, tax wealth not work, as people want to say, which is a good idea by the way, which is what I'm advocating in this video. Wealth taxes just aren't the way to do it though. Wealth taxes are dumb, don't really solve anything, don't even really solve the same sort of wealth hoarding problems that Gary is rightfully pointing out, and he should probably use his populist platform to advocate for land value taxes instead, because they're actually targeting the most egregious case of wealth hoarding, which is land. I saw one video where he gave the example of Chelsea Football Club, and he said, well, you can't lie about where Chelsea is. And I'm like, yeah, Gary, but the guy who owns it can lie about where his income comes from, right? He can lie about what his net worth is, and he probably can just move, right? Unlike Chelsea Football Club. So as you rightfully point out, we should do a tax on the land which Chelsea Football Club is built on, so we can't avoid it, which he will if you give them a wealth tax, because they'll avoid it in the exact same way they avoid most taxes, which is by claiming to be in different locations and using various tax loopholes. LVT doesn't have many loopholes because land exists and we can see it, and we can just see who the land is registered with. In the case of a wealth tax, you aren't taxing Chelsea the place, you're taxing the guy again, which is exactly the problem we suffer from in current tax avoidance situations. But if you tax the land, he's going to struggle to avoid it, as I said, and you are taxing wealth by definition. You're taxing wealth in the form of land, by far the thing that makes the most sense to tax, in my opinion, and many others. So yeah, please, Gary, if you do watch this, please can we advocate for land value taxes or land taxes of some variety instead of stupid wealth taxes. It honestly surprises me that he doesn't advocate for them. Maybe it's because wealth taxes, as I said in the previous section, have a nice ring to them, so you can do the tax wealth not work thing, and then you apply a wealth tax so it seems all reasonable. It seems like you're addressing the problem directly. Let's go back outside and we'll continue with the video.
You know, I was going to film in there, but couldn't be arsed climbing over the fence, to be honest, so here we are. If you can't already tell, my general thing with this video is how the usage of land and general economic unproductivity are the reasons why the UK is up shit creek. Now I will say, I have got a video idea about how a lot of the sort of doomer mentality we see online about the UK is a sort of collection of Russian bot farms trying to demotivate their geopolitical rivals. Like, I will say, the UK gets a bad rap, but the entire global economy has suffered since COVID. If you see the sort of propaganda around the Trump admin around inflation during the Biden years, this is a kind of a similar thing. It's because they also did the COVID lockdowns like we did. Well, however, there is a cost of living crisis, right? Why is that? Why did that happen? A large part of this, as I said, is due to the fact that we printed the fuck out of our money during the COVID pandemic, as did most countries in the world. I mean, if you look at the inflation graphs of various currencies, I'll put them on screen, you see the spike in 2021. This is predictably what would happen when you quantitative ease your currency to the extent that we did, to pay for the fact that we basically shut down the economy for a year. This is the economic catastrophe that was being predicted at the time, by the way, if people were wondering. Now, the UK is unique on some level with its cost of living crisis, given the absolute state of our energy system. That being said, I do want to do a bit of defence here as well, because go ask the Germans and the Italians about their electricity costs and see what they say, because we're about the same as them realistically in this regard. It's not just net zero here, although that does contribute to the problem, and is in fact true in some sense if you simply just want to ignore climate change as a factor in our policy making. But that aside, it is broadly due to our absolute refusal to rely on any other substance to generate our electricity and energy other than natural gas. So when the Muscovites get a bit leery and gas prices go woo-woo, as they want to do, we get disproportionately wrecked by this. Because not only does the UK provide the vast majority of its electricity from natural gas, it also decides to heat about 2/3 of its homes with natural gas. So you can probably see why the gas price is inflating and now largely causing this problem. No, it's not Starmer's Britain, it's Putin's Britain, unfortunately. However, predictably, this is what would happen if you shut down all other forms of energy generation. Like, I agree with you, coal bad and the planet's on fire and whatnot, but I should point out the same Thatcherite voters that were shitting on the coal miners and shut down all the coal mines in the 80s, and are generally the same types who are sceptical of net zero and are very willing to put the blame on them entirely for the state of our energy system. Lads, this is the social benefit that people talked about at the time of keeping the coal pits open. It's so that you have robustness to your energy system and we're not entirely reliant on natural gas. Now, obviously, we could have done other energy sources, as I'll get into, but you know, when you're not avoiding the blame on this one. The same reason why in the last section I advocated for tax exemptions on farmers, like we already do, because it's a collective good. So even if the thing itself is unproductive in terms of its economic output, in terms of the fact that it's going to generate revenue, we do actually need food. Now again, I'm not going to advocate for more coal power because I am in fact a soy boy who cares about climate change, but I'm not the kind of soy boy that neglects good energy policy. I'm a different breed, lads, you know. Even if the people that want to call me that are the people that ideologically decided to think that coal miners were pricks. Now, this is not a video about climate change, but it's safe to say it's probably not wind and solar, as bloody windy as it gets on bogland, as you can see today. It is in fact obviously and demonstrably nuclear energy, which we should be doing more. The French, as much as it pains me to say, have led the way in this regard, to where they now function about 70% of their grid on nuclear. Vast majority of it was made in the 70s and 80s, while we were deciding to shut down coal pits. We could have been making nuclear, but we can't, as we'll get into. So how were the French able to do this? Well, through classic French autistic level standardisation. Would I wish to focus on another element of this for the sake of narrative cohesion? And I quote, "Safety standards were set in near total secrecy through a technical dialogue process between the EDF and CEA and other government experts." Do you know what this doesn't include? Consulting Margaret the Boomer on her personal feelings on the matter. And funnily enough, the French haven't had one blow up on them yet, to my knowledge, so it can't be that big of a deal, can it really? And now, the French get 50% cheaper energy than us, and 95% low carbon energy for all the climate change, boys. Voila. Now, yes, various factors go into making Hinkley Point C take until predicted 2030 completion date, not least of which the classic bodging of finance and procurement that the civil service eternally want to do in our country. But I'm going to focus on one, again, for narrative convenience, and due to its connection to the reason that broadly the UK is economically inactive, and that is our planning laws, hence the abandoned land as always. And as a general term, the absolute bureaucratic mess of that system, where we give more power to Margaret the Boomer than we do sometimes to even local councils that approve various developments. Now, I agree, we shouldn't dig up the Lake District to build a nuclear reactor. Now, that's fair enough. Now, but why after over 20 years of my life does this single plot of land in my hometown only now just get development on it. All I'll say is, we aren't protecting nature, guys, we're just giving busybodies something to do. And I want to give props to the current government in this domain, because I think the fact that this plot of land finally got developed on probably likely related to the fact that they changed it so that you could only appeal once in the courts per valid claim, instead of the endless objection on objection spirals that all planning developments in the UK get into. And this is the thing, right? It's like, how can you start a business when you don't have a building to put it in? Do you know what I mean? Like, how can you build a business when you can't build a building? And then when you can find a piece of land, the rent is so high that you're going to struggle to sell your product for any affordable price for the poor sods under 40 who are paying half their income to a rent-extracting landlord every month. So now they don't have money for your premium wank cloths or whatever it is that you're looking to sell. And then after that, it costs you 50% more than the frogs to keep the lights on. No, and I don't think the downwards pressure which Ahmed is putting on Deliveroo wages is the reason that your rent is so high or the bills are so expensive. It is in one term because we live in a country for the old who love nothing more than to rent extract off the young, meanwhile protesting any housing development that would ease the property prices by which they're exploiting. Protest any development that could improve energy costs of the aforementioned nuclear reactors or solar panels or wind farms or whatever it might be, and then lock down our society for a year, requiring record quantitative easing to pay for it, devaluing wages even further while inflating house prices. As I said, predictably what would happen when you do that. And then spend their entire time in the GB News comment section complaining about how everyone hates pensioners, despite the fact that they have the only triple locked benefit in our country. And we need to fix the fact that buy-to-let landlord is now the most common form of business in the UK. Genuinely, what the fuck are we doing in this regard? I could be convinced to just ban buy-to-let mortgages from being administered at all by banks. They serve no economic purpose whatsoever. Cry about it harder in the comments, truly do, honestly. So much for taking our jobs, lads. Gaza, I think you're the one ruining the jobs market by charging so much in rent that they don't have money to start new businesses. You know, at least the bloody takeaway is providing something. I mean, granted, the thing that they're producing is red salt and saturated fat, but you know what I mean? I like red salt. And that isn't as well to say that I agree with mass immigration. I had a video in the works about nationalism and such. It is probably a thing that most left-wing people should not be supporting. But it's safe to say, in terms of economic damage specifically, coming over and taking low-wage work, which is a stunning policy by our governments for the past 20-odd years, while that is a problem, it is nowhere near as bad of a problem as the fact that the UK is effectively now a property market of an economy. And the thing that's causing that isn't the red salt merchants, but the very people that complain about them, who bought a house via buy-to-let and now using it to supplement their holidays in Tenerife, or bought their council house off right to buy, and now renting it back to the same people that they were in their youth. I was driving through the Cotswolds recently, and I saw loads of signs protesting this solar farm development. Now I agree, guys, you know, the left are gay and stupid for advocating for solar, as I've already said. We do, in fact, live on a wet rock. I'm looking at you, by the way, Green Party, talking about banning nuclear entirely from energy costs. I mean, guys, you're not actually solving climate change at that point. You're literally just giving a layup to any right-wing person with half a brain. Those same right-wingers, that half of which deny that it even exists to begin with, a talking point. And then if you do end up getting your way, making energy prices so expensive in the UK, you might as well just put the death knell on the entire economy for good. Hello.
You alright?
I'm ranting about boomers.
It's alright.
So valid.
Yeah. But these people complain about solar panels like this. This is something that we absolutely need to solve. When I was there, I saw that some farmer had stacked hay bales 3 metres high and was like, look at the obstruction of view that this would cause. And I'm like, knobhead, put up a fucking hedge. You know what I mean? I'm not being funny here, right? Like, maybe the Cotswolds are an area of natural beauty, so maybe don't put it there. Granted, where else are you going to bloody put it? You know, you complain about something that barely obscures your view, barely makes noise. They're not even that ugly, lads. Like, just build the fucking solar farm. This is not making the point you think it's making, Derek. And I bring this example up to just say, these people will protest literally anything. It's sort of like a Hitler-type scenario where appeasement is probably never going to work. Why not actually just do the form of energy that's feasible in terms of cost, land usage, and peak timing and all that sort of nonsense? And at least then we'll be upsetting them for some valid reason rather than something that's barely going to generate any electricity to begin with. Not just feel good because I guess Chernobyl and Fukushima were quite traumatising or whatever. Luckily, guys, we live in the most bureaucratic mess of a country to ever exist, so I don't think safety is going to be a concern. We don't live on a fault line, I think we'll be fine, is what I'm saying. All that being said, it is very popular to hate on the boomers online, and I'll just say now, hating on the old doesn't really get us anywhere. We must simply ignore them. It's the point I'm trying to make. If our country is to continue being a nice place, we need to start making economically rational decisions, whether that be doing tax in a smart way, or disincentivising rent seeking that they like to do, or in this case, not listening to the protests around power plants, not allowing them to protest every single housing development, and allowing us to build infrastructure so that everybody including the parasites themselves, can live in a richer economy. And by extension, stop transferring wealth from economically productive members of society to economically unproductive members of society. And that does include the people who are sort of generationally dependent on the state. As much as the left don't want to hear that, and the elderly put far too much blame on them for our economic woes, we need to have as many people in the workforce as possible, especially at a time like this, and it does not help transferring more tax dollars to them. But those people do actually need jobs to go to, which we won't have if we continue making energy costs so expensive and rent so expensive and stupid taxes on literally every single economically productive thing in the economy. Inflating property prices further through 40 and 50-year mortgages or help to buy schemes is not what we need. It only helps to drive the problem even further. We need to fundamentally discourage rent seeking through the land value taxes, like I said, banning buy-to-let mortgages, these sorts of policies. We need to start making it as hard as possible to be a rent-seeking landlord and as easy as possible to be a property developer. If you look at where we get our taxes from as an economy, the majority of our taxes currently are from dumb taxes, like income tax, like I said, paid by, disproportionately, the most productive members of our society, the people in the middle class, very high earners who basically are now charging an effective tax rate above 50% of their income. Yet another form of transference of wealth, where you're taking people who are actually producing stuff, and that tax money is then, if you look at what we spend the tax money on, being paid to pay for pensions and such, or pay for the NHS, which is vast majority used by elderly people. Money being transferred from relatively poorer people a lot of the time. And something like 1 in 5 people over 65 are millionaires. Obviously this is based on their house value, right? This is exactly why that's happened. Whereas for comparison, 1 in 3 children live in childhood poverty. We need to actually do things that are going to incentivise productivity, a lot of which will upset them, right? But you can't pay for the pensions and have them protest everything that gives you the tax revenue to make the pensions.
I saw this in the FT, noticed the sharp drop in 2008. Clearly this is driven by property prices and the general moving shit between banks type stuff. What this means effectively is only about 40% of the value seen in our economy on paper is in productive stuff, as in stuff that is actually being made, stuff that is being produced. You know, when I say the UK is a property market, I am barely exaggerating. But the migrants, you know, they put upwards pressure on prices. Yes, they probably do. They probably put upwards pressure on property prices because, as I said, land is a finite asset. I actually think, as a broad rule, the left need to be a bit more anti-mass immigration because it really only benefits rich, monopolised companies. It's why I said Deliveroo and Uber basically pay fuck all to their employees. Well, they wouldn't call them employees, would they? And why likely the Tories didn't reduce immigration figures for the 15 odd years they're in government, even though they were doing all the signalling to Gaz and Baz about it. Because it benefits many of the rich Tory MPs / voters to do so. And it's also why now you see the Labour government have actually reduced immigration. Not that anyone fucking knows about this, by the way. And no, that's not net, as in like including emigration statistics as people and the talking points around that want to go. That is actually the number of immigration, like people coming to Britain, have been reduced since Starmer's government have taken power. Which is broadly my frustration with the immigration focus in British politics. We probably should cut down the immigration, as we're doing right this second. However, that's not the reason we are struggling. Even as I say that, we do have a demographic problem, as in there are too many old people versus young people, which is why that decision was made in terms of immigration. Only exacerbated, obviously, by the fact that our politics is entirely set up for old people. But a very short-sighted solution indeed, in my opinion, is to cause various political turmoil in your country for the sake of solving this demographic crisis. Not least of which because it harms national unity when you have various isolated immigrant communities across major cities and subsequently the far-right reactionary groups that come up in reaction to it. But also, pragmatic arguments like that aside, I do think it is just reasonable to want people in your country to share values as a whole. And this isn't like whether you like falafel or not. This is like, will you beat the shit out of your son for being gay or not? Or will you allow your wife to talk to other men? Or even on the most fundamental level, if you can actually speak the shared language of the place that you're going, like if you can speak French in France, if you can speak Arabic in Saudi Arabia or whatever. Like this for my more centre-left and left of centre viewers. Yes, the extent to which the right focus on this stuff is like ridiculous and overblown in my opinion, given that it's not primarily what is driving the economic problems that we face, and actually would likely harm us in the short term, as in we could literally deport every single immigrant for the past 3 generations, and it would probably do no effect to the economy. In fact, it would likely harm us acutely, given the fact that most of these people are working in things like social care or whatever, which are industries that we desperately need right now as the demographic crisis is coming to fruition, which is pretty much necessary given that we don't pay a lot of these NHS and social care workers enough, meaning that we are effectively having to import people who are willing to work for lower wages to plug up these shortages. Like, we can't pay them enough because of this demographic crisis, further exacerbating this cultural problem of both seeing the rise of cultural values that I do not like, and also leading to the depression of wages in these industries. Intentionally, I think, by the way. Like, I don't think this was like a mistake. I think we actually just needed to pay doctors less because we have so many old people that are demanding to use the NHS and social care and all this other stuff. So we just have to cut all their pay. But obviously that depresses wages, so who else are we going to get to do it? But honestly, if the pressure was returned, as hopefully it will be, as we actually start paying these people more, if we can generate tax revenue in a reasonable manner, it is better in some sense, because at least that money then goes back into the economy. So when you pay the NHS workers, they're at least then spending that money in the economy again, and it gets recycled. It's a video for another time, but yes, I think it is bad to allow people with hyper-conservative views into your society en masse, because it harms the exact political views that I try to spread on this channel. Yes, it is true that in some of these enclaves you literally have some women who do not even speak English because they either aren't allowed or they have no incentive to speak outside of their small, culturally isolated enclave. I have seen it firsthand multiple times because I live in these places. I have grown up in the places where the right-wing propagandists go to make their stupid videos. So it is real. Like, I don't know. And it is unpopular. I don't want to be that guy who's like, oh, I'm saying spicy things, but like, it's an unpopular view on the left. But importantly, Shamia not speaking English and her husband drives a taxi or whatever it might be is not the reason that the British economy is fucked. It is literally just driven by the tragedy of the commons of the British population investing all their money into property and treating property as an investment, thus driving up property prices and destroying the economy generally through that, and voting against any of the ideas that might bring them down. To quote an article by Martin Wolf in the FT, I'm going to have to read off the screen here, but I've long been a supporter of taxing land value. Such a tax would be economically efficient and morally just, but it has been politically impossible. The landowning interest, which now includes a large part of the population as owner-occupiers, has been too strong. This is a tragedy. Let him cook. Let my boy cook for real. The true tragedy here is the level of radicalism that we're now seeing will only be driven to be worse by ignoring the fundamental reasons why these issues are happening. And at the very least acknowledging the historical things that we've done that made them worse, such as the COVID lockdowns as the example I've been given. Those radical populist groups don't solve the problems because they're populist and they're driven by the will of the people, which is exactly the problem that got us into this mess. It'll only drive the radicalism further. It's why even now, as I said, with Starmer literally reducing immigration figures, no one cares or even knows that it's even happened really. It's something that the Tories and these right-wingers say that they supported, right? But they still aren't happy because they're still economically fucked because that didn't really matter. And obviously they're going to say, well, it's because the people are already here or whatever, but we know this is probably not going to have a huge benefit in terms of economic. And as we don't solve the actual issues or try to do things that improve productivity, which is the fundamental issue, we're going to see more and more of these radical parties. So now it's let's deport illegal migrants, then it'll be let's deport every first generation immigrant, then it'll be deport every third generation, fourth generation, and then it'll be let's deport all the non-white people, and it's only getting worse, and you're in the downward. We're in the dark times, boys. We're in the dark timeline because fundamentally people are suffering, right? They're looking for solutions. The obvious solution around them is that. So that's the solution. The problem is the solutions that will actually help are politically impossible, as Martin also identifies. Probably too complicated to spread as an effective political message or simply fuck over the wrong people. So we probably will just see the decline of quality of life as we increasingly tax income more and more to try pay for it, leading to more economic decline, meaning we have to tax it more and more to pay for it. Again, to pay for the people who are complaining and further driving the radicalism in the politics, namely people over the age of about 50. Because those exact same people either don't understand the economic damage that they're causing through their actions of rentiering and opposition to things like land taxes and tax reform, or potentially just self-pushing back at it because they can catch some income in the sinking ship. At the same time they're going to convince themselves and the rest of the population that the high energy costs and high housing costs and etc. are caused by immigration and immigrants, not by the NIMBYism, short-termism, landlordism and lockdowns that they all cheered and wanted. You know, you remember the pots and pans boys? That really was the death rattle of the British economy, to be honest. I mean, the reality of this sort of tax is that people won't like it when they see a 500 quid tax bill on their house, even if they did get like a 10% reduction in their income tax and VAT and all this other stuff, because it feels worse or something, I guess. And also, it couldn't possibly be them that are the problem causing the economic dereliction of the UK, being the people who own multiple houses and protest every housing development, the exact sort of NIMBYs and stuff that I've described throughout this video. It is those who destroy the economy, not the guy who's working in a takeaway or whatever, because he's actually creating things and putting things into the economy. You are not. You are taxing the economy and making it more unproductive. If any of these people described are still watching this, given the cultural crossover, if you do care about demographics and British culture in the way that you so claim, you will not get that by further fucking over the young through income taxes and rent seeking. They will, and are, just leaving, meaning you can keep your HMOs, but they will be occupied by first generation Indian immigrants working in the NHS for cheap, because you refuse to pay the junior doctors enough, and we literally can't afford to pay them enough because the economy is so unproductive that we don't have the tax revenue to pay them properly. And for the left, I do feel very strongly that you need to stop pushing back on this idea of immigration and such being a broadly bad idea for Western culture and economies. Because even if you don't personally think you care about British culture, although I promise you do care about the general liberal values by which we hold, not having religious type moral codes enforced on your way of life, what you are actually doing is giving ammo to these right-wing people, meaning that we'll never actually do any of the important economic stuff. So fuck me, I guess. You know what I mean? Also, you probably are making quite a free market capitalist argument many of the times when you defend it, talking about it not being zero sum and such, which, I don't know, I mean, I'm one of those guys too, like immigration probably is good in the sort of modern capitalist model of eternal growth, not probably good for national unity though. So, for everyone else, we need to bring back a bit of a self-sacrificial attitude and understanding of nuance and such in our politics and general life. Because in reality, these problems aren't going to be solved by big shiny policies like land value taxes and many of the things suggested in this video. They're just good things that are going to help and are in the right direction. But unlike the answers you'll see from many of the populist leaders that are becoming more prevalent in our politics as of late, the reasons for things happening or why things are bad or good or whatever it might be are always complex. Sometimes things are forced, sometimes it's incompetence. It's never just the migrants or just the rich or the 1% or whatever, tax wealth not work or stop the boats. There's never any of this nonsense. There are just things that encourage or discourage good and bad behaviour that can make the society more prosperous for everyone. As an example, encouraging making stuff and productivity versus allowing and encouraging exploitation and rent seeking across your entire society. Or even just encouraging pro-social behaviour versus trying to burn down migrant hotels and looking for a civil war, or whatever the most recent schizophrenic rambling is I've seen. We need to just stack good decisions, and as a rule, probably just ignore the boomers more, to be honest, and maybe actually vote, but not for the Greens because they're all so stupid. So, I don't know, spoil your ballot or something, I don't know. I don't know, man, we just need to care about stuff that's actually going to make a difference and matters, and not get caught up in irrelevant drivel, really. There isn't a Georgia's political party at the moment, but there might be. If we continue talking about this stuff, you know, whether it be the general lack of development of the energy grid or infrastructure or housing and all this other stuff, and obviously by extension of that, the general unproductivity of the economy, and hopefully not spend our entire time doing culture war nonsense, or by extension whining about migration endlessly as if it's the sole cause of every issue, or trying to further add more dumb taxes to the already ridiculous tax system because it feels fair or whatever. Like, nothing is fair, nothing is like perfect, but there are just things that help and things that do not help. And I think land taxes do help, especially when we cut down some of the other dumb taxes that they could replace. Yeah. Stay hopeful.
Find a little cat. Hopefully, is he going to come past? Oh, there he is. What's up, geezer? Say hello to him. I don't think he's too sure. Sweet fella.